You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're going to be talking about science. We're going to be talking about planets, birds, mammals, frogs, and a lot more things, because it's about education, and it's about keeping up with the education of our kids. And we're trying to get to that point where they can have unlimited amount of learning, unlimited knowledge base, and the most up-to-date knowledge and information, because I think that sometimes there's a limitation on that. Some of the school systems, maybe there's a limitation in what they're able to teach, and being able to have children be able to ask the questions, be able to learn the information, the current information, and be able to really think about that and concentrate on that and let that develop not only their minds, but also their bodies. So joining me on today's Live Your True Life Perspectives is Dr. Penny Norman. Dr. Penny Norman has an amazing biography. She's done a lot of things, let's put it that way. She has a Ph.D. in Biophysics from Berkeley. She's also had her postdoc offers from Oxford and also Cold Spring Harbor. She's a humanist background in science and mathematics. And, you know, her background is so amazing because she's done so many different things. She has a master's in so many different information as far as mathematics, you know, working with NASA, all kinds of things. She's going to talk about that when she comes on. But the biggest thing that I find that's so amazing about Dr. Penny is her dedication to children, but her dedication to the concept of education. And we all know that children are our future, and the more educated and the more understanding that they can get, you know, the better we are and the better they are. Dr. Penny, great to have you on Live Your True Life Perspectives. How are you doing?
I'm here, and thank you for having me, Ashley.
I'm so glad you're on the show. And let's start off. You know, you founded a company which is now known as Science Whiz. And you've written more than 20 science STEM books for elementary age children over the last 20 years. And some of these STEM books have sold millions of copies, which is amazing. And I'm actually holding on to some really amazing stuff right here, some STEM books, but also these books are also, they can talk to you. So tell me more about, first off, how you kind of got into this realm, and then we'll talk more about your dedication to education in the future here.
Well, how I ended up, it's a woman's path. You know, we start, and maybe everybody, we start in one career path, and life and serendipity takes over, and you end up where you end up. And so I suppose that, and I had children, and in having children, I became very concerned about what was and wasn't being taught, especially at that time in elementary school in the sciences, because it hadn't improved since I was there. In fact, I think in many ways they were teaching less rather than more. And so that's how this all began.
And I'm sure that's true back in school. I mean, when you were growing up, the education was limited, right? And I think even now the education to some degree is limited. But, you know, when you were growing up, did you feel like there was a lot of things that you didn't get to learn, or you feel like was left out of the educational system?
Oh, yes. And I think, especially as I got older, I think one of the worst aspects of it for everybody, I think, is if you don't learn the basic phenomenology of the sciences in elementary school. I'm not talking about any math, just most of it's a tremendous amount of fun. But if you don't learn it early on, when you hit junior high and especially high school, if you have no prior knowledge and then they throw you into a class where they expect you to learn the phenomenology and apply the math, I think it's like, you know, throwing people all into the deep end of the pool and expecting all of them to swim, and it doesn't work. And that, I think that's the root of the problem for science education in the United States, is that we cover very, very little science content in elementary school in a way that's really just plain fun, but also primes you to succeed later in those fields, and just give you a general framework of knowledge to understand the world you live in.
That's so true. And a lot of times, too, and you and I had talked about this prior, that it seems like a lot of the educational system right now is based on testing, right? It's about passing certain tests and then kind of teaching to the test is what I've experienced actually. What do you think about that?
I think it's awful. Yeah, no, I think that, the best school internationally, Finland, doesn't do any of that. And I think it's diminished our schools. I mean, it's made a lot of money for the testing companies in the range of billions in some of the bigger states, but I think it's achieved very little. And I think now with AI, the need to make it separate from the learning process itself is essentially going away.
I agree with you, and it's interesting too. You're right. It's about the testing. It's about those companies that are making money, and then what are these kids really learning, and then how deep are they really being able to get into things that really matter?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I mean, for example, if you're going to learn to read, hopefully, you can read science as much as you can read about spot chasing. A story with little information content, and have a great time doing it. I mean, my original books were usually about doing projects and reading and following the images to do it. And I've had many children tell me, well, this is my kind of book. So, there are many kinds of reading, and we don't have to restrict it to topics without information.
That's so true, and it's interesting. I got some of the books in obviously, and it's really interesting. One of them is the online science discovery of planets, and the greatest thing about it is it's a hands-on project as well. And then there's a planet finder app, which is very interesting. Tell us more too about kind of the hands-on projects that you've implemented and put into all these books.
Well, a lot of them are essential in this particular set, could be done with almost for free. So, we do include material that are not readily available, but let's talk about planets. And most of it, actually, if you have a flashlight, a dark room, a round fruit, and a stick, you can do it. And you don't, it would be silly to invest a lot of money when you can get a wonderful experiment going to understand all the cycles, from the seasons to the day-night cycle to, to the monthly cycle, to the phases of the moon. You don't have to invest money to do that. You just can do it. So I didn't want to charge for that. But there are actually 10 very useful projects. And it turns out that for most students, they don't know why, in the United States anyway. They go through their whole lives not understanding what causes the seasons. But a very simple experiment with an orange and a flashlight in a dark room explains it.
That's amazing. It is interesting the things that are left out, and I think that's a good point. By what you're making are the things that are left out, and some of the things that, some are maybe simple, but also some things that could be easily learned by activity instead of thinking about the testing type situation. The other thing that I like about this too is the book you can actually talk to. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, we link to an AI bot it's a 3D, semi 3D animated character that you talk to, and you literally can speak to it or you can text to it, whichever you prefer. So, and I think it's a very natural way to read about science, because as you read along, but most of us have questions. Something isn't clear, we just have a question. And normally you can't ask a book that question and have it give you an answer. And now you can. And I think that it may lead to a different kind of reading that's especially appropriate for topics in science.
I think it's interesting too, the concept with the AI and being able to ask the questions, because like if you take like children in a classroom, kids in a classroom, I mean, you have one teacher, and that one teacher is supposed to answer all these questions. I mean, do you see obviously these books being very interactive and helpful in the school, during the school day in the classroom? I mean, how do you see that?
I think it's transformative. I think especially in elementary school, where teachers are often not well trained in the sciences, didn't have much of or any. I mean, any child that you can get to a question that no scientist can answer because we don't know. But that can make a teacher who isn't trained in the field feel very uncomfortable because they may not be sure of the answer, but they don't realize that this will make the answers extremely accurate and at their fingertips. They can simply ask just click on the icon, ask the bot for the question. She has a very nurturing voice. She'll answer it.
Interesting. So, if you're asking various questions about planets, and because again, you're right. Obviously AI is helpful because as humans we have limited knowledge sometimes. So, the knowledge base is a lot more vast. Obviously, I guess if you're asking AI.
Well, and it's interesting because you're really talking to a super polymath, and we our best. It's just really, really interesting. Our encyclopedias can't keep up with this level of information that, certainly a printed Britannica, which is what I grew up with. We all had to have the Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know if you were alive at that time. Every household had to have those in the 50s. Well, this is a super version, but you're talking to an AI that's actually just recently, it's passed both the bar exam, I think the score was 97, and the medical certification exam, though its score was like 60, but that's still passing, which is a little scary to me, but anyway, so you're talking to a super polymath. It's a really interesting transition we're going into because you'll have information, but it's all in a language structure that's geared to a 8, 9, 10-year-old. So it's age appropriate in its structure.
And is there a limitation on the things that they can ask?
Well, in the sense that it's structured to behave like a nurturing teacher who's schooled in science, but is talking to a child that they think is 8 to 9 to 10 years old. So it's not going to go off the rails and talk about drugs or violence or guns or I always use the phrase gun, sex, and rock and roll. You're not going to get answers for that out of her.
It's hilarious. It's probably a good thing.
And we were pushing it to try and test that, but we were afraid we were going to get excluded from the app because we were just trying to make it to see if we had restricted it to the point that it was behaving well, and it was. It was very, it was working extremely well. And we used it at Toy Fair where people were 4 days straight were coming in asking all kinds of questions because they all wanted to interact with it and see what she'd say. She never gives the exact same answer each time. It's not rote, and it's this is generative AI, so it's not, it's not that she'll tell jokes, but she's not very good at jokes. So they're not bad, but they're not always. I don't get all of her jokes. She will do a poetry actually quite well, and so you can ask for a poem about climate change, or so you can ask her for the meaning of life, or you can ask her what makes Pluto a dwarf planet, or what are the most common birds in your city or town. So cool. And she'll basically get it all right. So there you are.
That's amazing. That's amazing. When we return, Dr. Penny and I are going to be talking more about these amazing books and kind of the direction education-wise, as well as more about her background and her passion for creating this and doing this for kids and for our future. So stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time. Well, I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Joining me today in studio is Dr. Penny Norman. She has an amazing background, Ph.D. in biophysics, a humanist background. She's worked for NASA, and the list goes on. And she's also created some amazing books for kids to learn. And we were just talking earlier about one specific book, The Planets. And, you were saying earlier about the pale blue dot. Let's talk about that a little bit, Dr. Penny.
Well, when the satellite Voyager launched in, I forgot, I think was that the 70s, it reached past Pluto, and they had it turn around and take a picture of planet Earth. And Earth in that image is a single pixel wide, and Carl Sagan, I believe, called it the pale blue dot. And we were just a pixel, the whole planet, suspended in a sunbeam. That's what it looks like. And then he made a video of narration of that pale blue dot. It's one of the most profound commentaries ever made about Earth and the planet, and I don't think it should be missed. And it's there on that particular video or sound from YouTube is inserted into the book for listening to and seeing. It's quite profound. Another one right next to it is The History of the Earth in 5.5 minutes, and that's a graphic novel, and it's funny and amazing, but it's only under 5 minutes. It's just 5 minutes long. The history of the whole planet. And then one of my other favorites in the book is when we cover Mars, we link to this 4K video of the actual surface of Mars as developed from the images sent back by the rovers that have gone over on the actual surface of Mars. And that's amazing to really see the surface of another world. And it looks a lot like Nevada, but it's interesting. So anyway, it's packed with things like that, and it's just shouldn't be missed, as well as the Planet Finder, as well as the avatar attached to AI, so you can ask questions as you read along.
And those are some interesting things that you wouldn't catch in a regular science class, right? That's like things that they wouldn't probably bring up, or things that wouldn't get covered. It
largely probably not, because they often just don't cover it, and they're profoundly interesting. One of my other favorites is the most studied asteroid that ever landed on Earth. And there's a whole story about that because, it landed in 1969 in Australia and broke up. And the people around the community, it scattered quite a bit, collected all these pieces and gave them to the government. And then and a number of those pieces are actually at the University of Chicago. I'm not sure exactly how they got it from Australia, but they did. And the stories about what they've discovered from that asteroid, it's actually older than the solar system. And so it's amazing. And the story of that asteroid is amazing.
Well, we need to talk about it when we return. Dr. Penny has a wealth of knowledge. We're going to talk about more things as well that are very interesting. I mean, she has written 20 science STEM books for elementary age children, and this is amazing stuff. And her books and kits have received numerous awards, including a Family Choice Award in 2018 and various awards as well. And so when we return, we'll be talking some more interesting stuff, learning. I mean, I always love to learn. And on the side of the books, everything says ages 8 to 80. So when we return, we'll be talking more with Dr. Penny. Stay tuned. Don't change the channel. We're going to be talking about some more interesting things. We're also going to deep dive into some mammals, frogs, and birds and talk about some other things as well. So stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. Well, we'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Joining me in studio, Dr. Penny Norman, and she has a major background, worked for NASA, She has a Ph.D. in biophysics, and the list goes on. But she's created some amazing books, and it's under the name of Science Whiz. And so we were talking earlier about the planets, and let's jump in. There's another that I think is very interesting, which is the online science discovery of frogs, toads, and other amphibians. And it's the groundbreaking book that you can talk to. And so it combines hands-on projects with online storytelling, 3D manipulations, interactive explorations. So very neat. So let's talk a little bit about that, Dr. Penny, on the frogs concept here.
Okay, well, again, this one, there are no frog ID apps in the United States, so that was not included. We have that with the Bird ID app and the Planet Finder app for the book on planets. But there actually is a amphibian ID app in Australia, which is kind of interesting. Because they're almost like the canary in the coal mine, frogs and amphibians in general, and because they're sensitive to environmental changes and they're living fossils. But again, I think this is the youngest of the titles, and it's a hoot. It's just charming and fun. I love some of the songs in there. There's one from the National Academy of Sciences out here in California. They did a frog song, which is delightful on amphibians. And anyways, but again, this is in multimodal. So one of the most important things to know about amphibians is they are the vertebrates that colonized the land. And they did this in the Carboniferous. So but before we reach that point in the book, we also obviously talk about metamorphosis, which they do they make a spinner, and it's fun, and they color it, and it goes through the stages of metamorphosis. And of course, frogs makes sounds, and if you only have a book, you can't hear the sounds that the frog makes. And as it turns out, the bigger frogs make very deep sounds, loud sounds, and the smaller frogs tend to be more high pitched. And you can talk about that in a book, but if you have a 30-second video with the actual recording and watching the frog make the sound, then it's a picture's worth 1,000 words. It really gets it across, and it's just plain fun. And, so that's kind of what this book is, this merger of modalities. And then, it goes through metamorphosis, and they draw the pictures of metamorphosis. But there's nothing like actually watching a time-lapse video of the stages of metamorphosis. So we link to a video on YouTube that has had almost 10 million hits now, where children watch a time lapse of the metamorphosis of a frog, and it's quite amazing to watch. That's why it's had all those hits, and that's what we're doing. We're integrating across all these modalities. So it's a charming title with songs and videos and sounds, and and the biggest frog, the Goliath frog is in there, and the tiniest frog, and it's smaller than the width of the radius of a dime. It's tiny. And it was, so there's just, but there are also exotic frogs and poison dart frogs, and so it's fun and gee whiz. There's even a frog that's freezes over the winter, and that's a fabulous story. It literally is almost legally dead by almost any definition, except that in the spring it comes out of its frozen state and immediately goes off to find a mate. That's it. That's what this frog does. So it's a very interesting, it's hard to believe, but there are animals that go through cryogenic freezing and succeed and come out of it and go on to continue their life.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That's real. And then there's this fabulous story about a pebble frog that climbs and climbs and climbs. It's somewhere in South America, but its biggest enemy is the tarantula. And when it encounters it, it doesn't fight back. It just throws itself off this mountain cliff or down and rolls it just rolls down the off the cliff, but it isn't harmed, and then it starts climbing again. That's its defense. So they call it a pebble frog. It's like a pebble that can fall down, and unfortunately doesn't have a way to fly up.
Oh my goodness.
I mean,
That's
it's
really
amazing.
interesting.
Really interesting things. And and then again, what's also extremely interesting is that frogs really are not just frogs, amphibians were the first vertebrates to walk on land. Before that, the land was barren. There were no animals on it, except for the creepy crawly stage where we had scorpions, millipedes, and then spiders and arachnids, but we didn't have any vertebrates, no birds, until no reptiles, nothing was on land except the creepy crawlies. And then the amphibians that go through metamorphosis and could breathe air were able to walk on land, and they colonized the land for animals, for the rest of us, for vertebrates, animals with a backbone, fish, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. That's us.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a wonderful story, and it's so before the dinosaurs, before the age of mammals, which is what we're in, there was the age of amphibians, giant amphibians.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and those things that you don't learn. Those are things that you don't learn about things. You know what I'm saying?
They've left it out. We get coverage of the dinosaurs. They've had a lot of press, but we don't we don't learn about the giant amphibians, and we actually don't learn about the terror birds, which is a wonderful story in and of itself. So, which is another, when you get into birds, they were the apex predators in South America. They're covered in the in the book on birds, and they were ferocious.
Wow.
And they were actually alive when humans were alive, but the humans were off in Africa, and the terror birds were in South America, which at that time was an island continent separate from North America. But when the Isthmus of Panama formed, and that land bridge formed, and it shut off the Pacific from the Atlantic near the equator, when that happened, there was this great migration, and the animals that lived in South America migrated north, and vice versa. But the really wild thing is most of the animals living in South America died off for various reasons. So most of the unique critters that are now in South America were from North America.
Oh, wow.
They're invasive species.
That's amazing.
So it's a wonderful story, but so the terror birds made it, they know, to Texas and to Florida. So they've only found a certain number of fossils, but then they died out, likely because of the wolves and the saber-toothed tigers were just too much for them.
I would assume.
And the cold, because when the Isthmus of Panama fused, when that formed, that triggered what are the pattern we have now, which are these periods of ice ages and interspersed with interglacial warm, the warm periods. We're in one of the warm periods now. And that was triggered by the formation of that land bridge. Up until then, the Earth was warmer, but the circulating patterns in the ocean were different because the Pacific was directly connected to the Atlantic right near the equator, where Panama is now.
That's interesting.
It's a real interesting story.
Yeah.
But that may be part of the reason why terror birds died out, because suddenly we had, especially in the northern hemisphere, we had these ice ages, and it probably couldn't tolerate that cold. So, there's theories. So there are a number of reasons why they probably didn't last that long. And you probably wouldn't want to meet one because they were like, I don't know, if they were 10 feet tall, they were tall, and they were ferocious. And you wouldn't want to have to deal with one.
Definitely don't want to bring one in as a pet, right?
No, they truly were the apex predator. They killed practically anything else they wanted to. They were huge.
Wow. That is amazing, and it's amazing to learn that kind of stuff, you know. And I think it's even the adults that are listening to the show, you know, we're all, you know, listening to this entire concept. This is interesting. It's profound, and I think it also gives more of an understanding of, you know, where we came from and our universe and our planet, and I think that also makes things more meaningful, I think.
Yeah, I think it gives you a framework of knowledge that informs your worldview, and it's so often left out, and there's no reason to leave it out in terms of it's just interesting to almost any age. It's just plain interesting stuff.
Yeah, and exactly. It's the things that you want to learn. It's those interesting topics. It's those things that, you know, are just, I don't know, they give value to where you are, where we've come from, the evolution. And also I feel like it makes you more mindful, you know, in the process, because I think sometimes we're kind of walking through things. We tend to learn maybe a limited amount or as much as we have to get by. And that's another thing that I find is a problem in our society today, is that, you know, growing up and going through the school system, I did the same thing. It's like, you know, you did what you had to do to pass the test. And then after that, it was, you know, you didn't really pursue it. You didn't really get or dig deep into something. And I think that the greatest thing about these books is, like, for example, with the birds, you know, it's obviously very interesting. Another sidebar of it is, you know, being able to identify, is like an app to identify like birds, but not only by the way they look, but the sound, by how they sing a song. You know, I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's not something you think about every day.
Well, yeah, and that's a major resource, and that's available for free. And we're from Cornell. It's a fabulous, and we link to that and show you. And it, you know, it works, and you can use it to identify birds in your local neighborhood, but you can also use it to identify birds that you see on webcams all over the world. And we actually link to a number of those. And I mean, it's really interesting that the birds in South America and South Africa, I mean, they're so beautiful and colorful, but you can use the app to identify. You know, like in the US, we have 3 or 4 hummingbird species that live in various parts of the country, usually only 1 or 2 in a given region. In Ecuador, I think they have over 100 species, and the coloration on them is just amazing. They're just so beautiful.
That is amazing. It's and then the other thing that I find interesting. So I'm playing around with all these books and all this is great and all these activities. The mammals series is also very interesting too. You know, and obviously that's very interesting. The mammal series. And all the information that has, you know, who I like that, discover who eats whom, you know, kind of the pecking order, kind of that situation, but also, you know, creating that family tree of mammals. And I think that's really interesting as well.
So we have stickers that go with that. But the other aspect is that, and this is from my editor, Ann Einstein, and in her classes, when she covered animals, she would end the class with a game of 20 questions. And the way she used that, because you can't guess the animal unless you learn these categories. If you know, and she used it for children to learn categorization. So it's a lot of fun, and you can do it. It's a game, so they were delighted to do it. And the goal was to guess the animal she was thinking of, but you can do that with AI, and it reinforces what you're doing in the book. So Electra thinks of an animal, and you have to guess it with yes, no question. You ask the questions, and she answers yes, no, or maybe, and that's it.
Oh, wow. So very interactive.
It's very interactive. And the other thing about it, I'm trying to remember that, I guess that's one of the most exciting features, I think, is there's this reinforcement of what you're learning through a game, but it's reinforcing it. You know, if you really want to learn to play Yahtzee, right?
Exactly. I mean, when you're playing something, it definitely connects. That is so true.
Yeah, so that's part of what's in there. Yeah, and again, oh, the other part I really like about that book, I guess I only have a few seconds here, is the fact of as the dinosaurs died out, the non-avian dinosaurs. So by the way, when you go bird watching, you're actually dinosaur watching. That's official. Those are dinosaurs. And when you start looking at them as a dinosaur, you see them differently. It's amazing
Mm-hmm.
because they are a lineage of dinosaurs, birds. So anyway, the age of mammals began after the age of dinosaurs. And what's so there were mammals around during the dominance of dinosaurs, but they were living underground and nocturnal and tiny, but they survived the asteroid collision and the non-avian dinosaurs did not. But then there was a missing link in our understanding of how those evolved, how the mammals recovered and then radiated after the demise of the dinosaur. But there was a young man in Colorado that has actually helped to find a huge number of fossils in these concretions that allowed us to have a much better knowledge of how that evolution took place. It's a wonderful story.
Very interesting. Dr. Penny and I will be back here. Don't change the channel. We have lots more to talk about. We're also going to hear her golden nuggets of wisdom today. So stay tuned. Stay on the channel. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Dr. Penny Norman and I have been talking today about all things science, mammals, frogs, planets, all kinds of interesting stuff. No matter if you are an adult or a child, this stuff is very interesting, very fun. So, Dr. Penny, this is the time when I ask all my guests to give me a couple of amazing nuggets of wisdom that you would like to share with our listeners. And so definitely, I know that this is good. This is right up your alley. You could probably give us about 100, but a couple of them that you'd like to kind of discuss right now.
All right. So I think we're going into a period of where we have the potential to transform how we educate our children. And it won't just be AI that will change this. I think, as an example, during COVID, I worked on a real actual lifetime goal of mine, which is to take all this content I've created and I know is appealing and fun for children, or I wouldn't have been able to sell as many copies as I did. But anyway, and bring it into the elementary schools, because if we change it there, we change it everywhere. And, I know we have to overcome this issue of allocating so little time to teaching science in elementary school. And I think that's at the expense of our own ability to compete in the world and just to have a framework of knowledge. So what I want to convey in the process of doing that work and now adding in the AI, I think what I just stumbled into realizing, which is very interesting, is that, and maybe a little scary, is that using the tools we now have, we actually don't have a shortage of science teachers in elementary school. What we do have is a failure to use technology to solve the problem. And specifically, what I mean by that is with the newer technology now at hand, one individual, one skilled, knowledgeable person in science can teach an entire district of elementary classrooms. It's because of the ability to use hybrid learning and AI to do it beautifully, but with high production values. So it's can be very, very compelling and fun. And if it isn't fun, I think you've lost your audience and the potential for really teaching this. But it's not anecdotal. It's a framework of knowledge.
I agree with that, though. Being able to use the technology is so important, and being able to hone in on that. Dr. Penny, where do we find you? Where do we find more information? You know, listeners very interested, you know, wanting to look at the books, but also kind of the background. Where should they go?
Well, it's our website, Science Wiz. That's science and then wiz.com. Sciencewiz.com is where our products and descriptions of them are available.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing talking with you. I mean, you have a wealth of knowledge, and it's so great because you're giddy about it too, which is so nice. It's like it's really refreshing, you know. And I think that's what we want our kids to be too, is to feel happy and energetic and giddy about the things that they're learning. It's not like force fed. It's like being able to interact and experience it and have fun with it and enjoy themselves and learn things that they didn't know and learn things that their parents don't even know. You know what I mean? You think about it. It's like a lot of us have a limited a base of knowledge on a lot of this stuff because what we were taught in school was limited base of knowledge.
We're learning less and less about less and less. It's kind of scary.
I know. Exactly. Less and less about, I love that, about less and less. And it's true. And it's some of the things that we're dealing with are not the important things. And I think you're right. It's about creating that well-rounded child, individual person, really, who can move forward in their life in all areas successfully, and starting with the knowledge base that they get.
And I think a lot of educational experts have forgotten this really, really important point. If you don't love it and you don't find it interesting, you're not going to be motivated to continue looking at it. And I think they're so concerned about this theory or that, and they lose sight of the most essential ingredient, which is this stuff is just plain fun, and why take the fun out of it?
Exactly. It is fun. And Dr. Penny, I have enjoyed having you on the show, and I look forward to having you back on a new show in the future if you're willing to come back on. Definitely learned a lot today.
I love to. Thank you for having me.
Just glad to have you. And I'm going to have some fun with these books, kits, and be able to talk too, because I love this kind of stuff. I mean, I think we're all, you know, learning and growing, and, you know, that's what life's about, is we're supposed to be learning and growing every day of our lives, no matter what our age is.
Absolutely. That's why they say 8 to 80.
I love it. Yeah, on the boxes it says 8 to 80. Dr. Penny, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you. Looking forward to having you on the future, and looking forward to your future endeavors that you have, because I know that you have a lot more coming out.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me, Ashley. Thank you.
Dr. Penny was here. We had a great show. I hope that you can share this with your family and friends, because this is interesting. This is fun. This is education, and this is changing our future. And all of us need to learn and grow, and we can experience it and love it and be giddy in the same time. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. Well, I'll be back this time. We'll be back this time in 3 shakes.